Benjamin Netanyahu has told rioting Palestinians to get used to the reality that Jerusalem is Israel's capital after meeting with Emmanuel Macron in Paris. The Israeli Prime Minister said the sooner Palestinians can accept that reality, the sooner there will be peace. It comes after Donald Trump said America will officially recognize the city as Israel's capital. Netanyahu's highly provocative statement came amid another day of protests and violence in Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, which saw a 25-year-old Israeli security guard stabbed in the chest by a 24-year-old Palestinian. It also came as Macron issued his own, much more measured statement, in which he called for Netanyahu to show courage in restarting the peace process and called for an end to Jewish settlement building in the West Bank. In a concession to Netanyahu, he started the statement by condemning all the attacks of the last few days, including rockets launched by Hamas at the Jewish state. Netanyahu had earlier said he planned to rebuke Macron for condemning Trump's statement, but ignoring the attacks by Hamas. The Jewish leader also hit out at Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who had earlier branded Israel a terrorist country that kills children. "I am not used to receiving lectures about morality from a leader who bombs Kurdish villagers in his native Turkey, who jails journalists, who helps Iran get around international sanctions, and who helps terrorists, including in Gaza, kill innocent people," Netanyahu said. "That is not the man who is going to lecture us." Macron had earlier taken a phone call from Erdogan, according to a source close to the Turkish leader, and agreed that Trump's declaration had not been good for the region. Erdogan also spoke to other regional leaders and vowed to do everything possible to reverse the declaration. Netanyahu will now travel to Brussels, where he is expected to confront Federica Mogherini, the EU's foreign policy representative, who was also scathing of Trump's decision. Ms. Mogherini, who has criticized Trump a number of times for his Jerusalem announcement, said last week that the president's move has the potential to send us backwards to even darker times than the ones we are already living in. Previously, a 25-year-old Israeli security guard was left in critical condition after being stabbed at Jerusalem's central bus station. The guard was attacked with a kitchen knife by a 24-year-old Palestinian from the West Bank as he approached a metal detector, who fled but was arrested after being tackled by a passerby. Meanwhile, demonstrators burned Israeli flags and clashed with police elsewhere in the West Bank, while Palestinian Christians also held a march denouncing Trump's decision. In Lebanon, scenes outside the U.S. Embassy turned ugly as police were forced to use tear gas and water cannon to force back rioters who tried to storm the building. Meanwhile, marchers in Jalalabad, Afghanistan, also burned effigies of Trump, and thousands gathered on the streets of Jakarta, Indonesia, in a fourth straight day of anger. Elsewhere, the Israeli military said it had demolished a tunnel leading from Gaza into its territory, adding that it had belonged to Hamas. The tunnels are used to store rockets and weapons, and during the 2014 conflict the cross-border channels were used to launch attacks against the Israeli military. Missiles were fired into Israel from Gaza on Friday night, provoking a response from Israeli fighter jets and tanks that left 2 members of Hamas dead. Ms. Mogherini, who has criticized Trump a number of times for his Jerusalem announcement, said last week that the president's move has the potential to send us backwards to even darker times than the ones we are already living in. The most serious disturbances yesterday came at Rachel's tomb near Hebron, in Tulkarm, and on the outskirts of Bethlehem. A Palestinian youth was critically injured when he was hit in the eye by a rubber bullet in Ramallah, local media reported. The Israeli police spokesman, Mickey Rosenfeld, denied this, saying that protesters were precisely injured in the lower part of the body. Meanwhile, 3 Israelis were wounded as a bus traveling near Haifa in northern Israel came under attack by Arab youths hurling rocks. The driver was injured by flying glass and evacuated to hospital, while 2 passengers were treated at the scene, near the town of Arara. Police made 2 arrests. Demonstrations were also held elsewhere in the country, including in Umm Rahat, Tira and Tamra, but these were significantly smaller than those seen on Friday's Day of Rage. Nevertheless, the protests on Friday and the subsequent scuffles were less serious than had been expected, falling well short of the new intifada demanded by Hamas. It came after about 25,000 Israelis demanded that Mr. Netanyahu resign by taking to the streets of Tel Aviv last night, chanting "Mafia, Mafia," and "being a pig isn't kosher." They were voicing concerns over claims that Mr. Netanyahu received gifts from wealthy businessmen and made a deal with a newspaper for positive reporting, and that legislation was drafted to keep the allegations secret. A similar protest in Haifa turned violent when a group of anarchists supporting the boycott of Israel joined the march. The rallies followed a huge demonstration last week, when about 30,000 people spontaneously protested against corruption on Rothschild Boulevard, one of Tel Aviv's most iconic streets, in one of the largest rallies in recent memory. Naftali Bennett, the right-wing leader of the Beit Yehudi party, made a bold pitch to become Israel's next prime minister, saying he has broad experience in business, economics, government, and security, and I plan to use all of it. He stopped short, however, of calling for early elections. In a further sign of diplomatic backlash over the Trump announcement, a Palestinian Authority official confirmed that its president, Mahmoud Abbas, would pull out of a meeting with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence later this month. A White House aide said that the meeting was still scheduled, however, adding that would be counterproductive for Mr. Abbas to cancel it. Palestinian officials are understood to be lobbying the UN Security Council to pass a resolution demanding that the U.S. withdraw its recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. 14 out of the 15 members of the Security Council condemned Mr. Trump's move in an emergency meeting in New York on Friday. Yesterday, the Arab League demanded that the U.S. change its stance on Jerusalem for fear that it would stoke further unrest across the region.